trip to the Amazon is one of those things that a lot of people dream about, but very few actually take. And even fewer really understand what it's like until you get there. The river, the jungle closing in around you, and that feeling of being so far away from anywhere else you've ever been before. Today, we're digging into that experience and that feeling and what it's like when you actually get there. I'm going to be joined by my good friend, Chris Christensen, the host of the Amateur Traveler podcast. Chris has just come back from the Peruvian Amazon, and I was not too far away on the Ecuadorian side. We're going to be talking about our two different Amazon experiences, but really digging into what it's like in Peru, getting into the wildlife, the culture, and what makes this one of the most unforgettable trips you can take. Then in our second episode, we're going to be breaking down the logistics a bit more, how you get there, how to plan it, what it's like to travel by river cruise in the Amazon so you can help plan your own trip. So join us today as we head off to the Amazon. Chris, I understand you have recently got back from your first trip to the Amazon. And was this also your first trip to Peru?
It was, in fact, my first trip to Peru. So I've been to the Amazon, but I haven't been to Machu Picchu.
There you go. And tell me a bit about it. What brought you down there?
Well, so I was working with G Adventures, and basically they were offering that I could go on any trip that they do, which is challenging, actually, when you go to their website and you start thinking about where you want to go. That is a difficult choice. And for some reason, going to the Amazon and doing a cruise on the Peruvian Amazon just spoke to me. It just seemed like something that I want to do. And my wife was not going to be able to travel with me, and it's something that she did not want to do. And so that was just a little past her comfort zone, or at least what she perceived it would be. But easier than I thought it would be, actually. It was one of my biggest surprises for the Amazon.
There you go. Well, that's funny. We have both had very similar experiences because I was just got back from Ecuador from
Right,
going to
right.
the Amazon there about a week ago. And it was similar where I was going to an adventure travel event where it was a lot of hiking, it was not a trip my wife would have been super excited to do. So it was a similar sort of experience. And I found the Amazon to be, a remarkable experience. And I'm curious, what was your feeling when first arriving, your first impressions?
I was surprised by the scale. I mean, it's something right? It's something that you're aware of how big the area is. I mean, the whole Amazon rainforest area is quite large, but I didn't realize how much of Peru is rainforest, how much of Peru is that side of the Andes. And so, for instance, we were in one we were in one natural reserve that's half the size of Costa Rica. So it's not a small place. And this was just only part of the Peruvian Amazon. And so that was probably the first thing that was surprising. And then the other thing that was really surprising was the whole river level thing, that there is high water season and there is low water season, and the difference between them may be 40 feet. And all of the things that that means. So this area, this park that we're in, that is half the size of Costa Rica, in high water season is underwater. 5% of it is underwater.
And so when you're there, is this high
So
water season or low water season?
we were about halfway from high water season to low water season, which turned
Okay.
out to be a very good time to go. So we were there in July. And so the water had receded, so that is all now out of, not covered with water. The people can actually go fishing because the fish aren't hiding in the trees as they do in high water season. High water season is, for the people there, a time of want. And so they're eating their salted fish from last high water season, or last low water season rather, during the high water season. And they can't grow crops because there's just not land around. And so as soon as these sandbanks uncover, they start running in and planting their crops there, their rice and their corn and all of these things. And they've got 5 months basically to grow their crops and then to store them for the rest of the year. And it's some of the most fertile soil in the world because they're basically all of this soil that has been washed down from the Andes and is just freshly added into these sandbanks. And they take advantage of this time, and then really don't have the time in what would be our winter, their high water season, to do that. So this was more cultural than I anticipated. There were more village visits. There were more people just in general around that area, even in the natural preserve, at the borders of it, especially, than I expected. The whole, how life is affected by these changes in the river were very interesting, and how the people were adapting to that. And then there's the wildlife, and the wildlife is, just very cool in terms of sloths and monkeys and lots and lots and lots of birds. And so it was something that kind of like an African experience where you may not go for the birds, but you spend so much time looking at macaws and egrets and hawks and all of these things that you become a birder even if you didn't start that way. Especially as a photographer, it's really fun to try and take pictures of these wild animals, including, the world's smallest monkeys and all sorts of things like that that are you're seeing along the way.
Really interesting. Well, I'm interested to hear about the wildlife encounters because one of the things I found, and it's interesting, I'm just looking at the map here, where me and you were was actually quite nearby because I was in the far southeast of Ecuador, which is kind of a under the radar, not a lot of tourists going to that part of the Amazon or that part of
Yeah.
Ecuador. And it's very close to the Peruvian border. We were only about 2.5, 3 hours, I think, at one point from Peru where we were. But one of the things that surprised me is, when you think of the Amazon, you do think of wildlife encounters. And at least in the portion of the Amazon that we were in, I mean, it was rainforest, it was alive, but it was primarily 99% of what we saw was insects and birds. And amazing and beautiful, but we weren't seeing any mammals. They had,
Well, interesting.
I mean, they were saying that the region that we were in had largely been hunted out, and there just wasn't a lot of mammal life in that area. I'm curious what it was like on the other side of the border where you were in Peru. I know you mentioned sloths, you mentioned monkeys. What were the real standout wildlife encounters when you were there?
So, in terms of seeing in the wild, it was the porpoises, the pink and the
Did you
gray
see the pink
sorry,
dolphins?
dolphins rather.
Very cool.
The pink dolphins are harder to photograph. They don't jump as high out of the water normally. So we were seeing those. We were seeing I don't know how many different types of monkeys. We had the Michael Jackson monkeys with the white hands, and we had the squirrel monkeys. I'd say we saw 4 different types of monkeys on multiple times, sloths on multiple occasions, including a pet sloth in one of the villages we went to, which is adorable and not something you should do, but, you understand why people might wanna have a pet that only poops once a week, but, which is an interesting characteristic of sloths, but we didn't see, for instance, we're not seeing jaguars, we're not seeing tapirs when we were in the wild. Though we did go to a animal rescue center at the end of our trip and saw some of these animals that we did not see in the wild, like tapirs and, also, the world's largest rodent and things like that, which are,
Capybara.
capybara, yes, the world's largest rodent, the capybara. So we did see those the size of a medium-sized dog, but not in the wild. So much more difficult to run into those sort of things. We did see an anaconda,
Wow.
which I could have gone without seeing,
Yeah.
but we saw one on our 2 jungle treks, that we, saw one that was sunning itself just had shedded its skin and was fairly placid up until someone got too close to it and then made a mock strike, which caused us all to jump quite far,
That
strangely enough.
Well, I mean, certainly the wildlife encounters and the natural environment is a huge part of what people draws people to the Amazon and to this part
Right,
of the
right.
world. The other that you touched upon, and I found this to be even the much more compelling part, was the cultural experiences and the local interactions.
Mhm.
And I'm curious what that was like on your trip and the type of cultural experiences that you had.
Yeah, so we visited a couple different villages, got to see some projects that they were working on, like the village that was trying to reintroduce some butterflies and had a butterfly farm basically, or the village, every time you visited a village, there'd be opportunities for handicrafts to buy handicrafts. We visited with a shaman, a woman shaman, which is unusual, and heard about her life and training and the sort of things that she was treating and how she was treating them with different plants and such from the rainforest. So we went in a dugout canoe ride at one village with various members of the community. So got a chance to visit with some of the people from the various villages. So yeah, it was an interesting opportunity. They also then were our local guides when we did the 2 overland excursions that we did. So we had local guides who were helping basically spot some of the animals or plants or whatever that we were going to be seeing along the way. So they were the ones who were up a little further ahead of us saying, "Oh, look, there's a tarantula," or, "Here's a particular type of frog or a bullfrog," or something like that as well.
And I found, I mean, on the Ecuador side of the border, I'm curious, Peru's the same. I mean, those local indigenous groups have very much still preserved their traditional way of life and their traditional culture to a pretty great degree. I mean, there were even in some places uncontacted groups that obviously we didn't encounter, but we're not far from getting into that part of the Amazon.
So in the reserve we were in, there are uncontacted groups, but we were not obviously contacting them. But I would say most of the villages we were going to, if you use the word village and you use the local people, it's easy to get the wrong mental picture. I mean, these people were living in houses dressed in regular clothes. The houses were up on stilts, obviously, as as that river water is going up and down. Last year, for instance, their stilts were not quite tall enough, and the houses were flooded by about a foot of water in a particularly high water year. So that part was interesting. Both our naturalists were from the area. They basically had grown up without running water, without electricity and such, but things have changed in many of those villages. We saw solar projects in one village, and we saw one village that had a water treatment plant from Engineers Without Borders, or I see a water treatment plant. That's a little it is a little exaggerated, but a water purification facility, to try and deal with some of the waterborne illnesses. Obviously, that is a problem there. So, yeah. The other wildlife experience I didn't mention was fishing for piranhas.
Wow.
Take a little, meat, put it on a hook, stir up the water with the tip of your fishing pole, and then put in your hook and wait for a nibble and then jerk and see if you catch a piranha. So and
And
most of the group did catch, piranhas, fairly small piranhas, fortunately.
now I know piranhas can eat you, but can you eat them? Do you actually eat them once you fish for them and catch them?
One can. They're kind of a bony fish, and the ones we were catching were fairly small. They can get larger, but larger fish are more hiding. They can eat you. That's actually true. All that Hollywood exaggeration, they really can strip, a water buffalo or something like that in a minute, but they don't prefer that they prefer fish. And so unless they have run out of fish, then it's not really something that you have to worry about. We did have one experience where we went for a swim in the river, and that was a little interesting. We were in a black water river. Did you get any black water rivers?
We did a whitewater rafting trip, but no blackwater rivers, no.
So yeah, Blackwater in this case, in this region, they're talking about a region that there is so much plant life in the river that there's not oxygen for the fish. And so you're not going to tend to have fish in that river. And therefore you wouldn't have something like piranha. You wouldn't necessarily have something like anacondas or whatever. So it's a relatively safe place to swim. Now you can have lungfish. One of the interesting things, these ancient fish that are still in the rivers there that look like they're out of the primordial ooze, they can come up for a breath, and so they can live in these rivers that are non-oxygenated, that the fish with gills can't live in. But we only saw those in captivity. We did not see those in the wild. The 6 foot long lungfish, but fascinating area.
So that's it for part one. We're going to be coming back next week in part two of my discussion with Chris Christensen, getting a little bit more into the details of travel to the Peruvian Amazon, kind of how to get there, what some of the logistics are like, what the experience really on board a ship is like, and really breaking it down for you so you can plan your own trip to the region. If you're finding these episodes helpful, it's always hugely helpful for us if you can go on to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, give us a rating or a review, and check out all of our other travel podcasts from around the world on the Voyescape Podcast Network.